What I'm about to tell you is something I still think about often, especially during this time of year. This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was driving to my parents' house to celebrate the new year with them. They live a few hours away in upstate Pennsylvania, so I'd left in the late afternoon, figuring I'd get there with plenty of time to spare. The drive was supposed to be simple. I'm the type who really enjoys long drives, so a nice peaceful drive would give me some much needed time to think. But the weather had other plans. The snow started falling about an hour into my drive. At first it was light, just flurries dusting the windshield. Nothing to worry about. I thought the snowfall was actually quite pretty, but I'm pretty sure I jinxed myself. The further I drove, the harder the snow came down. It just kept falling and falling until I was literally in the middle of an honest-to-God blizzard. The highway turned slick and visibility dropped to almost nothing. My car, a little sedan, isn't exactly great in snow, so when the tires started slipping on even the smallest hills, I knew I had to pull over. There was no point in risking my life. It was my own fault for not planning out the drive better. I found a spot on the shoulder, far enough off the road to avoid passing cars, not that there were many. I texted my parents about my situation, and they seemed worried sick. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but I honestly wasn't too sure about that myself. I figured I'd wait out the worst of the storm, hoping it would just ease up, but the snow didn't let up. In fact, it only seemed to get worse from that point. It just kept coming, piling up around the car and on the road ahead. After an hour or so, it became clear I wasn't going anywhere that night. My dad offered to try and get out to me, but I told him that that was a death wish. I told him that if the snow didn't let up, I'd call the police, which he begrudgingly accepted as a decent solution. I really didn't want to call the police, and I didn't have AAA either, so that wasn't an option. I told myself the storm would have to let up eventually, and I decided that if it didn't by the time I got tired, I'd call the police. The thought of spending the night in the car made me uneasy. I didn't want to run out of gas trying to keep warm, and I was worried about killing the battery if I kept the lights or heat on too long. I sat there, turning the engine on and off every so often, trying to conserve what I could. The wind howled outside. I was starting to feel the weight of the isolation when I looked at my rear view and saw headlights cutting through the storm from behind me. I literally wanted to jump for joy. A snowplow pulled up beside me. I was saved. I rolled down the window as the driver leaned out of his. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He looked nice. He was wearing a thick jacket and had a black knit hat that was pulled down over his ears. I remember thinking his face was really wrinkly, if that makes sense. It looked weathered, like he had spent decades in harsh conditions. I expected him to say something, but he just stared at me for what seemed like an unusual amount of time. Eventually, he spoke, asking me if I was okay. He had a really gruff voice, definitely a smoker, and it was honestly kind of off-putting. I told him that I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to be friendly but also keep my voice steady. He nodded, saying that I wouldn't get far in a storm like this, especially with the car I had. He paused for a few moments, as if he were considering what to say. I watched his eyes scan my back seat, like he was looking for something. I was just about to respond when he offered to give me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him, and yeah, he seemed a little strange, but he struck me as a genuine guy. Plus, staying put with my car all night would have been stupid. I asked him if he could drive me to where I was going, and he said it would be no problem. I then asked him what I should do about my car, to which he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Leave it." After a moment, I agreed. I grabbed my bag and climbed into the cab of the plow. At first, the warmth was comforting. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease as I settled into the seat. He asked me where I was headed, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded again, but didn't say much after that. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something odd. He wasn't driving in the direction of my parents' house. I knew because the navigation was literally pointing in the opposite direction. I mean, we were on a local highway. There were only two ways to go. I tried my best to sound calm and asked him if we were going the right way in the most normal tone I could muster. I don't think I did a good job though, because I could feel his demeanor slightly change with my question. Without looking at me, he told me we were taking a short detour and that the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. We drove a little longer, and he did in fact get off the highway and start driving along some back road. At least the GPS said we were heading in the right direction. So I thought I was just being paranoid. Something in my gut was still telling me he was off though, so I started looking around the cab more closely. There were red flags everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled on the floor near his feet. There were torn up maps stuffed into the side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife wedged between the seats. I felt my heart start pounding. You know that feeling where your heart just starts beating like crazy and you're worried other people can hear it? That's what was happening to me. By that time, I was also positive we weren't going the right way. The GPS kept recalibrating because he missed turn after turn, not even looking at it. I was panicking. As we continued driving, I spotted a house in the distance. It was the only one I'd seen for miles. I had to act. It felt like a lifeline. I waited until we got closer, took a deep breath, grabbed the door handle, and then kicked the door open as hard as I could. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I slammed into the ground and felt my leg flare up with pain. I didn't care though. I got to my feet and started running toward the house. The man shouted something at me, and I glanced back to see him fumbling for something in the glove box, probably going for a gun for all I knew. I didn't look back again. I sprinted through the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. A man and woman opened it, and they basically pulled me inside. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I told them what had just happened, and they didn't ask questions. They just called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the snowplow was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out and search the area, but in that storm, finding him was unlikely. They offered to give me a ride to my parents' house, and even helped me call someone to tow my car. I was beyond grateful. My dad was furious once he found out, and I haven't driven in the snow since. I always think about what might have happened had I not jumped out of the car when I did.